So the purpose of this video is to analyze the sources and to evaluate the sources. Now, when we analyze something, we break it down into its major components and look at the relationship between those components. So when we analyze a source using OPVL, origin, purpose, values and limitations, then we're breaking each source down into those four components, and then we're looking at the relationships between those four components. When we evaluate a source or sources, what we are doing is that we are making an appraisal of those sources through looking at the strengths and limitations of those sources and then coming up with a conclusion. So let's begin with the first source. So let's take a look at the first source, the predator-prey graph. Now, as you'll notice, in terms of its origin, other than the title, predator-prey graph, we do not know its origin. Now, the purpose of this source is to show us the relationship between a predator and prey. Now, in this example, the predator is the Canadian lynx and the prey is the snowshoe hare. And it shows us the number of animals over a period of time from 1845 till 1925. So let's take a look at source 1, the predator-prey graph. Now the origin we cannot clearly determine because all we have is the title of predator-prey graph. The purpose of the graph is to indicate the relationship between the predator, which is the Canadian lynx, and the snowshoe hare, which is the prey. And in terms of the relationship, what this graph shows us is the changes in the population between the predator and the prey. And over time, from 1845 till 1925, we can see that it fluctuates. Now, looking at the values of this source, we always need to look at the values in relation to the specific question. What does this graph tell us? And this graph tells us that as the population of snowshoe hare increases, also the Canadian lynx increases, and this is an example of predation. Now, obviously the Canadian lynx population does not increase to the same levels as the snowshoe hare, and what we can see is that the Canadian lynx kind of mirrors the peaks and the drops of the snowshoe hare, but not at the same rate. So it tells us that there is a relationship between the two, so that when the snowshoe hare population increases, then so does the Canadian lynx population increase, because the Canadian lynx has more food to eat. And this is evident when you look at 1865. We can see the number of animals of the snowshoe hare being at 140,000, and the Canadian lynx has risen to just over 60,000. Then we see that because there's more snowshoe hares, then more will get eaten, and that causes a drop in the population of snowshoe hares. And then because there's less food for the Canadian lynx, that also shows a drop in their population too. Another value is that this graph will be based on objective data and statistics. The limitations of this source would be that, number one, we do not know its exact origin. Therefore, we do not know who has compiled the data. Is this from a reliable and credible source? And also, the information is very old, from 1845 to 1925. So it doesn't tell us any recent changes in population between the two species. Moving on to source 2, which is the 1-minute video about a garbage patch the size of Texas, which was published on December the 1st, 2015. Therefore, it's a relatively recent video. The purpose of the source is to show us the negative impacts that the use of plastic bags has on our natural environment, in particular how it impacts the ocean and the species which live in the oceans. The values of the source is that it's a short video with graphics to help us to visualize the problem and the impact that humans have on the natural world. It uses comparisons in terms of how many plastic bags are used versus the size of a plane. Most people are able to visualize the size of a 747. So that helps us to understand the depth of the problem that was faced by America. It also used the graphics to represent the state of Texas and also to show examples of how plastic bags does really impact oceans by getting creatures entangled and things like that. The limitations of the video is that it doesn't provide any references and it doesn't provide any quotes from any reports, so we don't know where this information is coming from, and because we don't know where this information is coming from, then it makes the source less reliable. If they'd added in a report to support where they got the facts from or the dates of when the facts were obtained, then that would make the source way more reliable. In terms of the strengths and limitations of the source, then again we can look to the values and limitations from the OPVL. Source 3 is about the 5 types of ecological relationships. The origin of the source is that it is the 5 types of ecological relationships, and we have an author of Angela Rajkowski, and we also have some references from where the information has been obtained from. Again, we don't have any dates for this. The purpose of the source is to inform through explanation and examples of the 5 types of ecological relationships, which are predation, competition, parasitism, mutualism, and commensalism. The values of this source is that it is informative and it provides information about the 5 types of ecological relationships. The limitations of the source is that, again, it's not dated, so we don't know how old it is. We don't know the experience of the author, Angela Rajkowski. She may not be trained in the field, but we do know that she's obtained the information from relevant sources, Biology Today and Tomorrow, and Living in the Environment. So as a value, these references seem to support where Angela has got the information from. So even though we don't know her experience or expertise, we could make an assumption that she's read relevant articles and used that information to write her article about the 5 types of ecological relationships. If we look at source 4, contemplating our relationship to the natural world, its origin, we clearly have it here. It's by David Nichtern, and it's been written for the Huffington Post on the 4th of June 2011, and it was updated on November the 17th, 2011. The purpose of this source is basically, the clue is in the title. It's making us contemplate our relationship with the natural world. So it's making us think about how our actions impact our natural world. The values of this source is that it takes it on a different slant to the other sources, and it's quite connected to individuals and societies. It talks about ancient traditions of Asia and the Europeans. It talks about ancient China, and then it also takes us through different philosophical or spiritual views, such as the Buddhist views and other cultures as well. This source is connected with source 2 because it mentions the YouTube story about a floating island of plastic refuse the size of Texas. So that's where source 2 actually came from this article. So those two sources are very closely connected. And it takes us through the journey between our environment and the ecosphere, and our understanding of that and how we play a part in that. It also, comes with a solution of, 3 main points of how we can contemplate our relationship with the natural world. And then it ends with a call to action. What are your thoughts? And it makes the reader think about what is their relationship to the natural world like. And that can make us think of, what are the things that we do well, what things would we maybe want to change to make sure that our relationship with the natural world is better. In terms of the limitations of the source, while it gives a sort of historical overview and a cultural overview of our relationships with the world, it doesn't provide any data or statistics to support the work. It doesn't refer to any other sources. So, for example, it talks about the Buddhist view. It doesn't reference anybody. It talks about the ancient traditions. Again, it's not referencing any key historical figure. So it's very general in that sense. And those would be the limitations of this source, that it just doesn't have any data to support any of the facts that it's presenting here. Looking at source 5, conservation extract from the National Geographic. The origin of the source is clearly indicated at the top. It's by Marjorie G. Dunn, and it was taken from a book, and it's being published by the National Geographic Society on August the 26th, 2011. So again, this has the same date as the previous source. In terms of the purpose of this source, it is to inform the general public about what we can do to conserve the resources that we have in the world. It talks about and it explains the natural resources that we have. It gives definitions like what is biodiversity, and it also provides some facts and data to support the writing. For example, if we look down to just under the 3rd paragraph after biodiversity, it gives information about the impact of different species and how, because of the way that we use our resources, this is impacting the population of the species. And also it talks about how the natural world benefits us in terms of for medicines, and how the Great Barrier Reef in Australia contributes $6 billion to the nation's economy. So it talks, it's giving us, perspectives on conservation. That leads us nicely into the values of this source. The source itself is quite balanced. It has a range of data and statistics to support the facts that it's providing. It talks about the disadvantages of human actions on the natural world, and it talks about the advantages that the natural world has on human activity, again referring back to the example they provide of the Great Barrier Reef and actions that governments take to preserve and protect wildlife and their habitats. The limitations of the article is that it's quite informative. It may not be that persuasive to the reader. It doesn't necessarily maybe persuade us to want to change how we behave. And in comparison to source 4, we do have that. Source 4 talks about what we can do, and then it makes the reader reflect on our own actions. Source 6 is talking about what is non-genetically modified organisms, what are genetically modified crops, and this has been taken from the Organic and Non-Genetically Modified Organisms report. So there's the origin, but again we do not have the exact date from when this report was published. Okay, the purpose of the report is to inform the reader about what is non-genetically modified organisms and what are genetically modified crops. The values of this source is that it provides clear definitions of the key terms of genetically modified organisms and genetically modified crops. It informs us of the risks about genetically modified crops in terms of its using potentially dangerous technology, that it's a radical technology, and that genetic modification is based on an obsolete scientific theory, and it provides some information to support that claim. So each of the three concerns that it has about genetically modified crops, they do provide information to support that. The limitations of this source is that if you wanted to know more about what is what would be the impact of genetically modified organisms or genetically modified crops, it only provides one perspective, which is the negatives. It doesn't provide any real positives, other than to say that they've created an ebook elsewhere about how you can buy organic food but not genetically modified food to help keep your family safe. So therefore it's biased towards informing the reader about the dangers of genetically modified crops, and therefore this is a clear limitation of the source, that it doesn't give a balanced view or point of view about the issue. Source 7 is another article which talked about the 7 major advancements 3D printing is making in the medical field. The origin, we don't have the exact date or reference for the source other than the title of the article. So again, that's going to add as a limitation because we don't know the year in which it's being printed or for which article or journal it's being printed for. The purpose of the source is to inform the reader of the 7 major advancements that 3D printing is making in the medical field, and provides those 7 examples of organs, stem cells, skin, bone and cartilage, surgical tools, cancer research, and heart and blood vessels. The values of the source is that it provides descriptions of what 3D printing is and talks a little bit about the process of 3D printing. It also provides examples of how it can help in the medical field, and for some of the examples it provides pictures to help support and help the reader to visualize the information that it's talking about. We can also see throughout the report is that it refers to other sources to support its information. If we look at the section on stem cells, it talks about the Heriot-Watt University of Edinburgh and what they're doing. It talks about research from James Yu from Wake Forest Institute regarding skin grafts and medical engineers in Germany. It gives us information about the Cornell engineer for bone and cartilage, and therefore it gives us further information about that. It references other medical institutions like Harvard Medical Institution, so therefore we can say that the article has been well researched and it provides lots of valuable information. The limitations of the sources is that while it gives us the benefits of 3D printing within the medical field, it doesn't talk about any of the negatives or the disadvantages of 3D printing in the medical field. And again, we can make a really strong connection here between criteria D in science in terms of the perspectives. It doesn't say anything about ethics. It doesn't say anything about social concerns. It doesn't say anything about the moral concerns or the safety of the patient. So these are clear limitations. Added to that is the fact that, again, we have no date or information from where this article was published for. So again, that impacts its reliability and credibility to a certain extent. But that is, when you weigh it up, when you're looking through the article, there is evidence because of the facts and the institutes it refers to, it shows that it has been clearly researched. And finally, source 8 is an infographic and talks about Google unveiling the self-driving car. The origin of the source, again, we do not have the date, but we know that the source and picture is from Google because it identifies that within the graphic, and it's being created by Graphic News because it has a copyright there for it at the bottom. The purpose of the source is to inform the reader about how Google has created the self-driving car and focusing on 4 key areas of the GPS receiver, the laser range finder, video camera and the radars as to how it works. The values of this source is that it provides information of the benefits of a self-driving car, that it will revolutionize transport by making roads safer and decrease congestion and pollution. It provides information about how this new technology is going to work to keep us safe. And the graphics and information make it clear for the car, and the graphic at the top where we have the little white car and the numbers 1, 2, 3 and 4 correspond to the points raised around the infographic itself. The limitation of this article is that it doesn't tell us about the eventual cost of the car. It doesn't tell us about any legal implications that a self-driving car will have, such as who is responsible if you're sat in a self-driving car and there's an accident. So those would be the limitations, along with the fact that again we don't have the date from when the article was written.